given her one daytime spot in the sun,
That was
and then
Ellen's utility.
oh, she could absorb these partial celebrities or
Yes.
these would-be celebrities. Yes.
Remember the actually kid?
No.
The little short red-haired kid who said actually so many times?
I
He
do
like,
not remember this
"Oh,
person.
actually, he was at the fair.
Mm-hmm.
Now he's like a decade older. But Ellen had him on on her show
Mm-hmm.
and absorbed basically all he had to offer and returned him to the void.
Sent him back to the abyss.
And we destroyed Ellen. And now we have Haktua.
Now we have Haktua, and we have nowhere to put her.
Exactly.
We have to give her an album,
Mhm.
and we have to listen to it.
Exactly.
Yeah, for 90 days. Oh, right. She's going to come out with a Christmas album, and we're going to be burdened with it.
Yeah.
Right. Ellen used to guard the gate of true fame. That was Ellen's social utility.
We chewed her up and spat her out.
Why? What happened with Ellen? Why did
She bailed. She's in the UK now.
She was a beast behind the scenes, apparently.
Oh,
Very unpleasant behind the scenes.
Just difficult to deal with as an organizational leader.
Yes.
Oh.
But yes, now she's looking at places in England to move post-election.
With her Portia Del Rossi.
Yeah.
It's her wife.
With her wife.
With her woman.
Yeah.
Interesting. Wow. So we have to find a new daytime host to have people on comfortable couches, give them unsolicited and unearned hugs, and then jump up and down with them right before commercial break.
We need our Dr. Phil and Ellen back.
Yeah. I mean, I think it sounds like Trump is going to pull in Dr. Oz to head some part of his administration. So even Dr. Oz might be off the waves.
Doing. And Human Services.
Health and Human Services. That's RFK.
Oz is doing
something.
And who's in front of who's going to be in charge of NIH? That's Jay. Oh, help me out here. How do you
know his name?
Yeah, I mean, shout out to Dr. J, but we're gonna butcher his name. Bhattacharya. Did that sound right?
Yes.
Yeah, co-author on the Great Barrington Declaration. I think that was the one they said was gonna head up the NIH under RFK. So I'm very interested in seeing how that turns out.
So fluoride's going to become a hot topic.
Fluoride, yes.
Yeah.
That will become the new litmus test.
Oh.
Bro,
You in?
Wow, it's going to become the new vaccination.
I think so. I think that'll be the new flashpoint of, pro or anti-science.
Yeah,
Bhattacharya.
Yeah. Bhattacharya. Jay. Interesting.
If Dr. J wants to come on the show and teach us how to pronounce his name, we are more than happy to accommodate his schedule. Yeah, I'm sure he'll be busy after the 20th.
Invite.
Yes. Yeah. What's the mood in Washington right now? If you want to scoot the mic maybe to the edge of the table and just tilt it up. Yeah, you're good right there.
Good like that.
Yeah, you don't have to lean into it.
Okay.
But just don't push it away from you.
Right.
So. Yeah. What's the mood in Washington right now? What's the feel of the street?
Well, I do want to come back to fluoride.
We can stay on fluoride. Let's talk about fluoride.
Make a note of fluoride. Mood in Washington depends on which side you're on. I'm at DARPA, so we have our leadership chain is a few steps removed from political appointees, but political appointees would very quickly have an effect on who becomes DARPA director and then would have an effect on agency business.
Okay.
But at least for DARPA and national security, it seems like it's somewhat more bipartisan. You're not going to have we're never worried about the political wind shifting and eating into DARPA's budget.
Okay. DARPA is technically part of the executive branch, or no?
It's under the DOD.
The DOD.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, yes.
So trickle down, but yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a department under the Undersecretary of Defense for Research and Engineering.
Gotcha.
We just printed out a map of all key people in DoD.
Uh-huh.
About this big.
How fine is the print?
It's pretty fine. And there's probably like over 50, department or like units within that chart, all rolling up to the Secretary of Defense.
All rolling up to the Secretary of Defense. Okay, so DARPA is just one part of that puzzle.
Right.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
All right, I want to come back to DARPA, but clearly fluoride's on your mind. So,
I think fluoride is something that shouldn't be contentious, but it was introduced in this century. Well, I'm revealing my age, I guess. So, introduced into our water supply like in the 1900s. So
Okay.
relatively recently.
mm-hmm.
My understanding is kind of based on expert judgment, not like extensive scientific study to say you should start putting fluoride in your water. Europeans don't do fluoride in their water system like Americans do.
Mm-hmm.
And even though people joke about the dental health of our cousins across the sea.
Uh-huh.
Like outcomes are very much similar in terms of like dental health.
Okay. Number of dental visits before the age of 7, perhaps, or the number of cavities, the number of dental interventions.
Yeah.
Okay.
But
So it was introduced into the water supply here in the United States on the notion that this would improve the dental health of families, I'm going to say below the poverty line.
I don't know if that was the motivation or just that like this is, this could be a benefit for public health. But if you look into it, like it's now I think a bit of our culture. Like fluoride's always in our water.
Right.
And you want fluoride in your toothpaste and whatnot.
Yeah.
But I think I'll find it interesting to see how the debate develops. Because it could easily become one of these flashpoint topics of.
If I know your opinion about fluoride,
yes,
I know your opinion about the existence of God,
yes,
creation versus evolution,
yes,
whether or not you own guns,
yes,
and whether or not you're going to be throwing a party come January.
Yeah.
Dang.
Yeah.
I agree that these issues do become litmus tests. What is the opposition to fluoride based? What is fluoride doing to us that might be bad?
I think RF.
Robert Kennedy.
Yeah. Too much fluoride can have negative consequences, and I think he would point to somewhat the absence of like long-term studies proving its efficacy. So if you reach out to maybe the EPA and ask for studies, I think you need to look to see if those like exist and are done. But I think his point is we started doing this. It's now just something we do, and we kind of assume it's rational and scientific, but it may not necessarily be.
We had a guy on here, I'm going to say 3 months ago, who he's a nurse. He has an extensive medical background, and he was not even in the mood to question it, which really caused me to raise my eyebrows.
Fluoride is a recurring topic on the podcast.
Ironically, his name was also Kevin. Yeah. He said
a tale of two Kevins.
A tale of two Kevins and fluoride. Yeah. So I'm curious.
How did fluoride come up?
We were talking about public health.
Okay.
And
this is so fascinating.
Yeah. We were talking about public health. We were talking about memes in public health. These ideas that just catch a population become sort of a generally accepted notion.
Yeah.
So red meat is bad. Like, how did that catch fire?
Eggs are bad.
Eggs are bad. Saturated fats, cigarettes. I do agree that cigarettes are bad.
For the record, I think cigarettes are bad. I can't
Right.
get canceled in DC. I have to remember what I'm going back to.
You're on the one
Yeah.
podcast in
Right,
Wyoming.
right.
What?
They may Ellen you.
Something about
Right.
fluoride in cigarettes.
Right. Right. More cigarettes and less fluoride. You're out
Yeah.
to lunch. What struck me is that he was on the opposite side of the coin that we seem to be discussing. We didn't have time to get into fluoride specifically, and I don't think we had the resources at hand to discuss it in depth. But it struck me that it is the commonly accepted wisdom right now, and it sounds as if RFK is going to be battling that. Is that the
I think it's one thing he's like, I'm gonna attack the accepted wisdom of the establishment. And this might be kind of a club to do that with. And it helps that like across Europe, there's some countries that put fluoride in their water supply, but the majority don't. And I think that makes it a helpful club to say, look, we're doing this because we've always done it. So let's not try to like let's assess it for what it is, as opposed to being like, we need to defend this because it's part of what we do. So now we need to like reverse engineer good reasons to keep it or do it.
Huh.
So I just foresee fluoride becoming one of these hot button topics.
Wow.
When it's like, it really shouldn't be. Like, either there's enough information to make like, an informed decision on whether this is good for the public health, or it's one of those things where like in COVID, you should have just said like, with all of the currently available data in front of us, this is where I would lean towards, making policy or doing X, Y, and Z. But like public health policy things always seem to be like, this is 100% the right way to do things. And if you object, you're anti-scientific. Does that make sense?
It does. You and I have discussed before a anecdote about Jeff Bezos, in which he said when he was building and developing Amazon, he would be willing to make critical decisions when he only had 70% of the information that he felt he really ought to have. Shout out to Jeff Bezos for getting us our goods here in rural Wyoming.
This is your formal invitation.
Right. How else would we ever
J-Dog.
get right? How else would we get our windshield wiper motors delivered to us here in the middle of nowhere in 2 days' time?
Yeah.
But I'm reading into this a little bit, but I suspect the reason that he needed to be willing to do this was so that he could grow Amazon at the pace he was willing and wanting to grow it, so that he could stay ahead of the curve of these other competitors like Walmart, who said, wow, online shopping is the way of the future. So if he wanted to maintain his edge, he needed to make these calls with less information than he would have liked to have. My question is, when it comes to public policy, and you're not running a business, you're running a government, you have authority over people. In your opinion, is that an appropriate model?
I think you have to it depends on the like it depends on the cost of not taking action. So for Jeff, not making a business decision to expand into diapers means that like Walmart.com is growing their market share. So it's like you either make a decision or your decision is inaction and you continue losing market share. So you'd have to find some analog for public health on that type of cost benefit analysis. Is like waiting to make a decision. What is that costing you? So, and I think
it would often be impossible to know, right? How many people are going to die if we don't mandate a state of emergency?
I think that's probably the case. That's very difficult to know, like what inaction costs you. I think there's a political cost of like just looking like you're doing something. There's incentives for politicians to look like they're doing something.
Mm.
So like their cost to inaction is always quite high, right? Um, the other thing though with the Jeff Bezos example is I think the one defense during of decision making and how it was conveyed during COVID was you have to talk to the public with more certainty because that's the type of information the public is capable of handling. And I'm kind of aware of going down that potentially dark road.
Mm.
But if you tell the public, like, hey, you should wear masks, they might help. We think they should help, but we're not quite sure. Things seem to indicate that, things are passed through particles in the air. Um, so we recommend it's better to wear a mask than not. How do you translate that into like mandating masks? You kind of have to talk about certain things as if like this is definitely like the best way to attack this issue.
You have
And
to sort of dress up half-grown ideas, like a teenager in his father's suit. You got to make him look more impressive than he is.
yeah, and you have to like for Jeff, if he's talking business strategy, he's not going to tell his whole company, hey, we're going to try to expand into diapers nationally, and it's a coin flip, but like I decided to go in this direction. He's probably going to sell it as like this is definitely the best business strategy. Get the troops fired up, get everyone, rah rah.
Hmm.
Um, so I think critics of like government policy, if it's like, well, they overstated certain things at certain times, I would be a little more forgiving of some of those um, like statements to the public on the
Hmm.
best way to do things because I don't think you can really get 350 plus million people on the same page unless you're like this is the only option.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
And you think that would be sort of a tenet of leadership is that you just have to make a stronger case than you yourself might be feeling
yeah,
if you want people to fall in line.
yeah. I mean, I'm watching Lost.
Wow, throwback.
Throwback.
Yeah.
Um, so the people, the leaders always find information in the show that like the rest of the survivors don't have. So they discover, the creepy people in the jungle, or the underground bunk. Spoiler alert for anyone who probably
For anyone who, yeah, for anyone who's watching
Yeah.
Lost 20 years after the fact.
Um, so in that show, it's those people who get that privileged information are always deciding at what degree they're parceling that out to the rest of the group because of things like the group's panic, the group mob mentality and decision making.
Hmm.
And the reason I called it a dark road is because like if you become too enamored of your own expert judgment
Hmm.
and you lose faith that like the public can handle any type of bad information or ambiguity, it can be it can become too easy to default to like, daddy knows best. You
Hmm.
just listen to me.
Right, right. And you see the population as something to be managed rather than collaborated with.
Right.
Yeah. That's something we discussed with, I think, Virginia Arbery. She was active in a number of political campaigns, as well as running for office herself. And she said there's this really deep tension between two ideas of the management or the rule over a population. I think she used the term Whigs and Tories. The Whigs basically believe that a population should have more information and more say in their rule.
Okay.
Tories basically believe that experts should rule a population,
Mm-hmm.
whether that expert is a monarch, an oligarchy, or a managed democracy, right? So, and I think it's generally agreed that Woodrow Wilson was the first American president to essentially describe to that Tory model on a really deep level that we really need experts managing our problems rather than the voice of the people. And we were discussing sort of, will this two-party system, will this welfare versus pick up your own problems and pull yourself up by the bootstraps model, will that tension ever be solved? And I, at the risk of speaking for Virginia, I think her answer would be no. There's always these two sides to the argument. No, we should have put experts in charge of solving these problems. No, the voice of the ruled should have say in how they are governed. And it's very difficult to absolutely deny one side or the other of those points of view. So
that's an interesting historical labels to use, because the distinction is very broad. It's like trust the elite or trust the masses. But even with that Whig Tory distinction, like the voting masses from that time period would be considered like in a social strata somewhat higher up in our socioeconomic system. So like trust the masses in the Whig Tory hour were like trust, all the voting people, but that was probably landowners and whatnot.
Sure.
The America today, that same distinction is like trust technocrats or literally everybody over the age of 18. So yeah, so if you were, so the Tories of yesteryear would probably be absolutely frightened if they were, Tories of today. They're like, I don't even trust, like, if you weren't going to trust your populace,
right,
your politically enfranchised populace 150 years ago,
right?
Imagine that Tory transplanted to today. And they're like, everyone over 18 can vote and is someone who has a voice in decision making.
Right.
We need to gas these people.
But I think when you're talking about the question of, once again, not endorsed, that statement by the host, I think when you talk about that distinction of like, oh, should you trust like the politically enfranchised public or the experts? It's just interesting that what's the content of those two groups? The content of those two groups has changed a lot over time.
Yes.
The content of those two groups should probably drive the answer to the question. Does that make sense?
It does. The content of those two groups, on one hand, the politically enfranchised has generally expanded in America over 200 years. The expert class has probably shrunk in the sense that those who are, it's probably bigger than it once was in terms of number of people, but in terms of access to it, I suspect that access to it has constricted, right? When was the last time, for example, that we had a president who didn't go to an Ivy League or top 20 university? That hasn't happened in 70 years, right? Once upon a time, the son of a tradesman could become president. That's not going to happen in the political environment we have today.
Yeah. And to put it another way, in terms of the content of those two groups, the Tory of yesteryear might have been wrong. The Tory of today might be right.
Yeah.
That's what I mean by where you come down on that question. Like, you can't ignore the fact of those, of what are the characteristics of the populace you're saying you're trying to trust. I'm trustworthy. I'm an expert. How do we get on this?
I think
the winning path of my wisdom takes.
There is wisdom. It's a winding path to get there.
Yeah.
But trust me, it's there.
Yeah. Buckle up for the ride.
Another thing that you and I have talked about in the past that really interests me is your conviction that most people tend to stick inside the echo chambers of the political, religious, lifestyle, you name it. They tend to stick inside the echo chambers that they already agree with. And actually, agree with might sound too intellectual. The political echo chamber or the religious echo chamber or the exercise science echo chamber that they vibe with. Why do you think people are so drawn to their own echo chambers and don't spend enough time getting out of them?
I mean, I think an easy answer is people are become unmoored or frightened when something they take for granted as the assumed knowledge is shown to not be the case. Those frightening moments, like, you tend to want to avoid. So, like, it's comforting to stay in your echo chamber. I think something that's a bit more interesting is the fact that I think it's really hard to find someone who you can, like, trust and kind of get along with, who has very different ideas from you. Just finding someone like that who also, like, you enjoy as, like, a friend or counterpart, to, like, have discussions that would allow you to talk outside your echo chamber. So I think there's kind of systemic obstacles to trying to get out of your echo chamber. Like, what happens if you're on the liberal side of the spectrum and you're like, you know what? Let me get outside of my echo chamber and I'm going to watch some videos of, Ben Shapiro, Candace Owens, yada, yada, yada. What you're going to hear is plenty of sound bites and catchy gotchas, which are probably gotchas that you, coming from that side, would consider to be like a straw man argument. So I think it's hard to get outside your echo chamber because it's hard to find someone who you can, like, feel like you can have a civil, good discussion with. I think it's hard for people to have good civil discussions on things they really care about, approaching it with the openness that, like, I could be wrong. So, like, imagine trying to, talk to a devout Muslim as a devout Catholic and go into that conversation fully open to the fact that I'm here to learn and to really adjudicate my reasons for what I believe, and I'm open to the fact that, like, I could be wrong. I think it's very hard to be the type of person who can do that. And to get outside of your echo chamber, you need someone on the other side who's also that way. You need to find that person and then be interested in having those discussions. It's probably more difficult than dating. So
I'm looking for my one.
Yeah.
Like a marriage partner? No. No, someone who can agree with me, but in a really interesting way.
Yeah.
Right. You think finding a
man.
right. You think finding a life partner is difficult? Try finding an intellectually honest political opponent.
Yeah. And who's someone who's not just, like, in it to win the argument, who's in it to be like, hey, let's really examine this. We both might be wrong. And maybe we can return to this, but I have the notion that any correct viewpoint is always going to be down the middle of the extremes. Like, and just to tease that, like, most, like, if you look at, like, Catholic doctrine and heresies always fall on, like, two extremes, and the, like, truth is right down the middle. And the truth, to be right down the middle, always seems to be in tension. It always seems, like, paradoxical. So it's easier to be like, one God or many. And then for it to be like, for the Trinity to be the truth, it's right down the middle of those two extremes.
Oh, interesting.
But to stay down the middle, you need to accept the fact that it seems paradoxical. And it's really hard to maintain that. So people typically veer one way or the other. I could think of more examples, but that seems to be kind of like a general thought that I would love to tease out more. And like, it seems to manifest in a lot of different like areas.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Like, should we socialize medicine? What should our welfare policy and outlook be? It seems a little extreme to say anyone who's not producing for themselves should be taken care of by the state. Well, that doesn't seem very fair. Someone could be not producing for themselves the things they need for life because they're lazy, or because they're psychopaths, or because they're comfortable with exploiting a system. But on the other hand, to say, if you can't produce for yourself, I guess that you'll be exiting the gene pool right quick, right? Well, what about orphans? What about the very sick? What about the helpless, right? So to say, oh, you must be able to take care of yourself because no one else is, that's very easy because it's super simple. Can you take care of yourself? Yes or no? No? All right.
Bye.
Bye. Right? You're voted off the island.
Yeah.
Another reference to a late 90s television show. Uh, on the other hand, oh, are you taking care of yourself? No? Okay. Stand aside. We'll come in and take care of you. Man, that's going to lead to a lot of problems as well, really quick. There's a lot of lazy people.
Yeah.
There's a smaller number, but they're definitely out there of people who are very comfortable with exploitation of others. I think that number is smaller, but there's definitely a lot of lazy people.
Yeah, I'd have to think of some of the other examples,
Hmm.
which is why I say let's tease this. But just to continue teasing it, Jordan Peterson always talks about like order and chaos, and typically like the right action to take is walking the line between those two extremes. Um, so like you need to move into adventure and like engage with the chaotic, but from like an ordered foundation. And there's always this like walking the tightrope of not going one extreme or the other.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I find that idea so interesting is going back to our politics, is it seems like, well, and actually the echo chamber thing is, I think, a lot of really good discussions with someone else on the opposite spectrum, I think is going to leave people with more conclusions, which are like they'll start to see more and more nuance, and the end result will be a conclusion where it's like taking the best of both sides and like kind of walking the ambiguous line down the middle between them. But then you're kind of homeless because you're not in one camp or the other. You're like, you're like opposed to fracking, but like if you're talking energy policy, you know, it's either you're going totally green, solar and wind, or you're like pump oil and
Drill, baby, drill.
let's level some mountains, let's destroy the timberline. So
let's endanger some species, baby.
Yeah. Let's make some money. But if you like, I think if you go down that middle, that's the result of those good conversations. But there's something like less satisfactory about that. So I think people don't get out of their echo chambers because they don't have the temperament to do it. If they don't have the temperament to do it, even if they did, it's hard to find someone else on the other side who has that same temperament. And then when you have those good discussions, it doesn't lead you to being like, oh, great, like I was right. Or, oh, cool, now I know that you were right. It leads both people to be like, we were both wrong. Oh, that's awful. And now we have to like walk this much more nuanced path that has no now we're outside the echo chamber walking this path of like it's no fun anymore because you're seeing all sides of the issue. Like if you're you can be like, hey, we should no longer build houses in Florida because of the hurricanes, and it's like you could be like a climate you know climate disaster proponent, and then you listen to Bjorn Long.
Hmm.
Yeah. And he's like, look, extreme weather events, if you just prepare for them a little bit better, you don't need these huge policies that cost a ton of money to like fix this issue. It's a very boring fix. You just need like brackets on your roof line to prevent it from blowing off in the high speed winds. He's like, certain very simple fixes can like alleviate big problems, or also like you construct a little bit out of the way of like the big storms. But if like that's your shtick, who's gonna be
Your
in your camp?
your shtick is galvanized brackets,
Yeah. It's
right?
like the fix is a $2 fix, but no, it's like you're either like destroy the political party who's proposing, like $1 billion tax breaks for things, you know, you're on one side or the other.
There ain't no party in the middle.
Yeah.
Just the lonely path of prudence.
Mm. Well, yeah, because then I think you have egos in mind. Because then you're like, what good did you do? I sold 10 million brackets rather than I passed a $5 billion bill. It's like it
Yeah.
gets a lot more publicity.
Yeah. And I think there's a lot of like perverse incentives with politicians where you need something flashy to get you reelected. So you're not really incentivized to do the boring long-term fix. But that problem's been around forever, right?
It's kind of like investing almost. Like usually the best investments are the ones with the most boring names.
Right. No one wants to date Warren Buffett.
Right.
He drives a car worse than what I've driven.
Mm.
I need some McDonald's. On those two vectors, we're the same.
Right. I'm like Warren Buffett.
That's it.
I might see him through the drive-through.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, third richest man in the world. Um, Still ordering number 6. Yeah. Frying burgers.
Yeah.
Interesting.
But yeah, and the man leading the free world worked at McDonald's.
Say that again.
Trump's Trump serving the fries. Yeah, Trump served fries to Warren Buffett. Yeah.
Oh, that
Yeah, biggest news event of the century.
Yeah. Like, what?
Did you have opinions about how the Democrats ran their campaign?
Probably not super strong or illuminating opinions. I mean, I do think it would be interesting if Kamala had gone on more podcasts the way Trump had.
Mm.
Like, she seemed to shy away from long format media engagement, both like podcast new age media engagement, but also like the establishment media. And that seemed to create a sense that like, do you not have enough to say in those forums?
Sure.
Like, can you not sit down and have a good substantive conversation about some of these things? So it would have been really interesting. I definitely would have listened to like both side by side if that had been the case.
Just as a side note, I tried to listen to fonts of predictable points of view. So I would listen to something from MSNBC and then switch over to Fox and listen to something on Fox on the same issue, or CNN and say Shapiro, right? And just touching on that echo chambers topic for a moment, I agree. It was so difficult. It felt like standing in a cold shower when I was listening to the side that I didn't agree with. So it does make a lot of sense to me why people tend to avoid it. To have your paradigms trodden over is not fun. And it was really hard. I mean, you could have said, "Oh, as a punishment for doing something wrong, Jonathan, you have to listen to 80 minutes up from the side you don't agree with." And I realized, oh, there's just something deeply riling about having your opinions downtrodden without an ability to shout back.
Yeah, because I think you get the sense they're not getting a fair hearing.
I think that's probably it. Yeah.
So you don't have a chance you don't have a chance to clap back.
Right.
It was the, I think it's the five women, The View, is Whoopi and
Yeah.
yeah. So they were just in Joe Rogan's spotlight because they were talking about him believing in dragons.
Mm.
And that was the tagline that made the media. So this was an interesting case study because they were like, did you they were talking about how you need to triple check all your information. And then the View, the host of The View, was saying, well, did you know that Joe Rogan, as an example of someone who needs to be fact checked because he gets people on the show, they just talk about whatever. You don't know if that person's spewing nonsense or not.
Mm-hmm.
So she was using him as an example of this new media that you need to do better fact checking. And she said, well, as an example, did you know that Joe Rogan believes in dragons? And the other people, are like, oh my gosh, that's crazy. He believes in dragons. She goes, I triple checked this. He believes in dragons. And then that was the clip that like made the news. And then so Rogan's Instagram is a dragon believer is his bio. So a lot of people had fun with it. But then she kind of went on a little bit. She's like, yeah, apparently he believes in dragons. And then she was like, and by, he kind of means, dinosaur type of creatures who lived at the same time as humans. And it was interesting because like she made this kind of outlandish claim about Joe Rogan that he was a dragon believer.
Mm-hmm.
But technically, like if you held her feet to the fire,
Mm-hmm.
she wasn't technically lambasting him for believing in dragons. She was really ribbing him for the idea that that dinosaurs lived at the same time as humans,
Mm-hmm.
which I think like is commonly like the common scientific consensus is that that's not the case.
Mm-hmm.
So if he believes that, he's kind of kooky.
Mm-hmm.
And it was an interesting example because like the conservative right side of the media took the like dragon thing and ran with it, but they weren't treating it quite fairly. But she also made some outlandish claims for the soundbite of it, knowing that no one was in the room to kind of fact check.
Mm-hmm.
So she led with that very, you know,
Something that could grab
the
attention.
zinger.
So you led with the zinger
Yeah,
when, in fact, the substance behind it was actually fairly boring.
right,
Right.
right.
What do
And
you
it
mean
was
by
like,
dragons, Joe? Do you mean like large reptiles that could potentially have an ability to spew a substance that could catch fire? Yeah, okay. That doesn't sound as exciting as you believe in mythical creatures
right,
flitting about the sky.
right.
Yeah.
House of Dragon style.
House of Dragon style.
Right.
Right.
But in terms of echo chambers, like the Joe Rogan camp was just, attacking them for being like, they're making the claim that I believe in dragons. And it's like, yeah, she did say dragon, but it's not really what she meant. At the same time, you can accuse her of
Of
giving everyone who believes her side the soundbite of like, well, the View
the
told me
soundbite
that.
they wanted.
Yeah,
Joe
yeah.
Rogan's crazy.
Right.
Right. Which
He's a dinosaur hop and yeah. Yeah. And in terms of legacy media, the ironic thing is they're the dinosaurs.
and they're the ones breathing fire,
Yeah.
or at least attempting to. That's very funny. That's very interesting. So my attempt to try to be politically balanced by listening to issues from MSNBC and Fox, Michael Knowles and CNN, it sounds to me as if you're saying, okay, maybe that has some utility, but the real utility is in having an intelligent, intellectually honest, and sincere friend who's willing to explore these issues with you with an openness to having their mind changed in the course of a conversation.
Which is why I think it would be interesting to do kind of practice conversations with AI or ChatGPT. Because you can write prompts which are like, hey, I believe this for these reasons. Talk about whether AI has poisoned the well with the data it's trained on, yada yada.
Hmm.
But you can like list out your reasons and then be like, what are all the reasons someone who doesn't agree with me would like list back? And I think it could allow you to tease out some nuance in kind of like a safe space, um,
Okay.
in a way that you might not have the opportunity, given how hard it is to find someone on the opposite side who's willing to have those good conversations that don't get emotional, that don't,
That don't feel personally attacked.
right.
I guess our paradigms are very dear to us.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you come in here and start telling me the fetus is a clump of cells, all of a sudden, you're touching on something that I was taught about when I was 6.
Right.
So you're hitting something very close to my childhood.
Right.
That's tough. On the other hand, if I come to you and say our welfare roles are overpopulated with people who don't need the help, you might feel as if I'm looking to starve the children.
Right.
Yeah.
Think of the orphans.
Think of the orphans. Think of the orphans.
What would Dickens say?
Okay, so this is interesting. So using AI as a way to educate yourself on the typical arguments you might face.
Yeah. So as opposed to just using it as superpowered Google,
Mm,
use it as an interlocutor of conversations that you're trying to like to tease out.
hmm
Um, and I think it could then prepare you to have like better conversations. But it would also allow you to like, it is kind of a completely safe space, if you will.
Sure.
So you could throw out, your crazy,
Do dragons exist?
right?
Yeah.
Dragons exist, and AI is not going to be like, you're crazy. Be like, here's 10 reasons why they don't.
Right.
um, so I think we were talking about this earlier, that would be an interesting way to get in the habit of like doing that, because I think getting in the habit of being, discovering you're wrong
hmm
and getting comfortable with that is a good habit to build.
This is very Thomistic, I think, at its core, right?
Yeah.
When St. Thomas writes a argument, he begins with a question, but then he comes up with 3 to 5 arguments against the position he ultimately takes,
Mm-hmm.
right? He articulates the opposition, and then he works as hard as he can to make the best case for the opposition that he can come up with, and then he gives answer. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a really intellectually honest way of approaching a question to try to reinforce your enemy.
Right. Right.
Thomas is the OG GPT.
Yeah.
He was, yeah. St. Thomas was the OG GDP. We're going to put that in the title. Yeah. The OG GDP.
You you can derive more wisdom from his teeth than mine, I'm sure.
Yeah. Why are some people afraid of AI? Is it a marketing thing? I was thinking about this the other day. I think I might have even put it in a message to you. If we just called AI language model algorithms, would people be a lot less alarmed?
I think yes. I think Elon Musk stirs up a lot of anxiety, um, talking about AI taking over the world.
Mhm.
I think, and I'm happy to be proven wrong on this, I think most people's anxiety comes from them having no like metaphysics of philosophy of mind. Like if people are worried about artificial general intelligence, the implicit assumption is that like mechanistic computer algorithms can completely emulate what a human brain could do. Or I shouldn't say brain, what the human mind is capable of doing.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're a Thomist, um, or a Catholic or whatnot, then like your rationality is a power of your immaterial soul relying on the instrument of the brain, um, And some people's brains are Stradivariuses, and some people's are fiddle. So
And they're missing a string.
yeah, yeah. So some people are banjos. Um, Nothing against our country listening crowd. I'm a big fan. um, don't want to alienate, the burgeoning.
Yeah, we're gonna have a mob here at our Wyoming door. Right. Tom, don't share our address.
In DC. Don't worry about him.
We sent him away.
Yeah.
We sent him back to the country he came from, the District of Columbia.
So I think if you are a materialist, then you're going to be very concerned. And I think most people are materialists, so that's why most people are concerned.
Mm.
I'd love to have. I've chatted with some folks. Alma mater is Catholic University in Washington D.C. Have a good conversation of a computer scientist, a philosopher, a theologian, ethicist, to talk about artificial general intelligence and this question. Because I think if you're in the echo chamber of like the Catholic world or the philosophy world, you're kind of like, oh yeah, obviously computers can't do what I do. Like you don't even I don't think you reckon with how good these could get.
Oh.
You were saying that like most normal everyday conversations could be emulated with a large language model. So like I don't think people realize that you could get AI to the point where you could be fooled that you're talking to a human probably for an extensive period of time.
Right. How are your kids doing? Oh, nice, nice. Where are you headed vacation? You and your wife going to go back to Cabo? Oh, real cool, real cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, great food in Cabo. Have you tried Smollett's? Yeah,
Yeah.
great food at Smollett's. It's like, kill me.
Yeah.
These are the conversations we're having?
Right. So I think it's easy for people to be like, oh, if a computer doesn't have like a soul, I don't need to worry.
Mm.
That's jumping to a conclusion. To be on the other side of the fence where it's like AI could do anything a human could do in terms of the human mind, you're also overstepping, if you will.
Right.
So I think the general public just assumes that the computer is essentially no different than the human mind. So this is very concerning to the general public because of that implicit assumption.
Most people spend most of their day doing things with their body and producing words with their mind. A AI can produce words very similar to what we produce in a given day. And so people might be looking at AIs and be like, wow, it is doing what I do. It's talking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think the results you get out of ChatGPT are very convincing that this could be, take this and throw the electricity output of a nuclear power plant and a quantum computer behind large language algorithms, and you'd be like, "Ooh, that could be frightening."
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, it seems that
it
people
can still be frightening, even if it doesn't have an immaterial soul to
Right.
give it true like rationality, the way a Thomas would say. This is a power of your soul. It relies on the instrument of the brain. A brain, told to do certain things or operated on a certain set of instructions that can be very sophisticated, that can like, could become very dangerous to humans, even if it's not exactly equivalent to the human mind.
Sure. Sure.
So maybe there is cause for concern.
Yeah, I've mentioned this before. I'm interested to see if the rate of improvement stays as high as it seems to have been able to sustain. It seems to me that history would typically indicate that most technologies have an explosion of improvement that then tails off to very incremental improvement, right? We had a lot of antibiotics and they got really good really fast. And now they're part of our medicinal war chest,
Yeah.
but they haven't solved disease the way some people were claiming.
Um, yeah, I think you can always look back and make those assessments. I think the response for AI would be you don't know if you're still in that uphill
Hmm.
ascendancy. So I would say like quantum computing would help explode AI to like another level. Then maybe it becomes that incremental um, improvement. So
Mhm.
like what we might be seeing is halfway up that explosion slope.
Sure.
Um,
There might be another peak beyond it. We
right,
can't even see it.
right. But looking back on history, it's easy to see what the top of the peaks were
Sure.
in retrospect.
Yep.
But applying that rule to the current day, I don't think you can tell where you are on the curve.
Right. That's a good point. Yeah, it just seems like if you had looked at air travel in 1919, people might have said, 1919, man, we've come a long way. 10 years ago, we were barely aloft. Now we have fighter planes,
Yeah,
right? Then 20 years later, we're just getting on the cusp of jets. Holy cow, jets,
yeah,
right? We're and then 20 years after that, we're supersonic. Everybody's going supersonic,
yeah,
right? Wow, look how far we've come. If current trends continue, we'll probably be traveling close to the speed of light in another 80 years,
right,
right?
right.
Now, 80 years later, and we're not traveling that much faster. We really aren't. Not that much faster than we were in 1960.
That we know about.
And we know about, right? Oh, that's fair. Yeah. And we know about
That's true.
the dragons and the dinosaurs and the aliens are being
Yeah.
picked up. Yeah. And they're jetting around.
I saw another UFO 2 weeks ago.
That's right. Okay. But is that us? right.
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 Right. We're still not traveling.
We're right. Right. But whoever is visiting us is having a grand old time
Yeah.
traveling at 98% of the speed of light and not sharing it with us.
Yeah.
I want to be in Cabo today.
What's their deal?
What? Right, right, right. It's like the first kid on the block who got a bicycle and wouldn't share it with anyone. Like,
Yeah.
"Yeah, that bastard. Like, come on, let me pedal.
Yeah. Give me a taste. I'm gonna put some maple syrup in my whiskey. I hope that's not anathema to your viewers.
Let's take a quick break.
Or a good example,
Mm-hmm.
you know. But like it does seem to be the case that um the truth is right down that fine line where you feel like it's like wrong because it's combining both of the wrong sides.
Ah,
So it's like, and I'll just keep using that Trinity example. Multitude, only one, and it's like the right answer is both.
mm,
You know what I mean? And I think you could find, and I have more examples. I have to just think of them. Um, but it's like take both wrong, take both extremes, and the right answer is probably going to be some undiscerned wedding of those two.
right.
And I think if you approach like hard problems that way, you're going to be on the better right track. But it's hard because they always seem in tension. Like this probably like applies to marriage. It's like, how do you bring together like a man and a woman who seem to like conflict on so many vectors where they have like their way of doing things, and it's like, oh, this fundamental like building block of the family is built on this tension between like the man views the world and does things this way, the woman does it this way. The right answer is you put both together and like move forward. So I think it'd be an interesting study to go find examples of this, but also examples of where like I like the example of the heretical debates where it's people who are like, no, it has to go this way, and other people are like, no, it goes this way, and like, how did they think through those reasons? Like, what intellectual pitfalls did they fall down that led them to think like they couldn't walk that balancing act between the left and the right?
Interesting.
So the reason that that's attractive is like I feel like it could become not a system, but like a heuristic of like, hey, I've got two people with opposing ideas. Instead of me trying to like figure out who's right, it's probably going to be more productive to figure out how they're both right moving forward.
Right.
And I'm really
Rather than
drawn to
say
like
who's right,
effective
say
heuristics.
what do each get right.
Right. Did I put maple syrup in this?
You
I
did.
did.
You did. That's
The
interesting.
hosts are here
Right.
for.
Were dinosaurs around when humans were around? Were dinosaurs definitely not around when humans were around? Well, actually, well, ostriches were around,
Right.
right?
Chicken.
Emus, chickens.
Yeah.
Yeah. They're kind of dinosaurs.
We have so many
Like
symbols.
woolly mammoths definitely were,
Yeah,
right?
I think so.
I think that's generally accepted.
Triple check it, folks. Triple check it.
Yeah, I think that's a generally accepted notion that woolly mammoths were around.
Right.
Because there's all the artwork. Humans
That's what I.
with dragons and dinosaurs and things. So it's like, well,
Oh,
have you heard about that?
no.
There's this temple in Egypt. It was on the Graham Hancock series,
Mm.
Right.
but it has these like big like gates in the front, and there's pictures of dragons and like dinosaurs on there, like the super long necked ones.
Yeah.
What are those called?
Stegosaurus?
Brachiosaurus, maybe?
Brachiosaurus, yeah.
Brachiosaurus?
And we got to get a dinosaur expert on the show.
Yeah, we did.
Yeah.
But yeah, they had pictures of them on the gate, so people were like, "Well, how did they know these existed if no one was alive?" You know,
Yeah.
people are curious. Like maybe we're older than we realize, because that's something people are wondering now. Is maybe the pyramids they're thinking weren't built by Egyptians, but were built like 35,000 years ago.
Someone on the Joe Rogan podcast talked about that.
Yeah,
Is that Graham? Is that the guy?
Might be Graham Hancock,
A big guy, bearded,
the beard.
talks about the.
oh, Randall Carlson.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
He's a fun guest.
He's
yeah.
right. He's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very
Right.
deep voice.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. He's got the Methuselah voice.
Yeah.
It looks like Santa Claus. If he told me something, I'd believe him.
Yeah. That's,
Right. Right. If
we're
you,
on the right track.
if you told me aliens walked among us, I'd say, I believe you.
Right.
I was reading an article about Jackie Chan. He could do push-ups on his index finger and his thumb.
Huh.
He could do one-handed push-ups, on two fingers.
Just two fingers, sole support, not four
Yeah.
total.
No,
Two total.
two total. Yeah, two fingers.
Oh my.
Yeah, exactly. He could hit a bag 100 times and 100 times in a minute. Like that's more than once a second.
Yeah.
Yeah, things like that. And I think, man, maybe there are aliens, and maybe they walk among us.
Yeah.
It'd be very comforting to think that maybe Michael Jordan just was a Martian in disguise.
There's a movie about that.
It's called Space Jam.
Yeah.
It's right. It's trying to tell us the truth.
Yeah. It's out there.
Right. Right. It would give us a lot more comfort when we're this average, right?
Well, I do take. I mean, we mentioned unplanned aerial phenomenon.
Hmm.
UAPs is now the invoked term, I think.
It is now the invoked term.
I totally think if there were UAPs, it would be the prudential judgment of the authority that is aware of their existence to not disclose.
Hmm.
Which just it plays right into the conspiracy theorist.
Oh,
Yeah. So then it's like lack of talking on the subject becomes proof of the existence. But I do think it's one of those things where it would be very reasonable to, because here's the thing: if the U.S. government said yes, we've observed UAPs. We've talked to the Russians and Chinese. You know, we believe them when they say it's not us, it's not the US. So they're there and we don't know what they are. Is that really the end of the press conference? Is that your zinger? We don't know. Like you wait until you have more information and you just if I was in that position, I couldn't address the American people and say, yes, we've identified these things, they're out there. We don't know if they're dangerous or not. Like we can't catch them. All of our sophisticated yada yada yada.
Right.
Um,
The highest level of our technology hasn't the faintest hope of
right,
outmaneuvering these things.
right,
So they're just sort of here.
right.
We are in their fishbowl.
Choose your God and pray. Yeah.
And don't forget to vote.
Yeah.
Anything that would be destructive to the body politic.
Yeah, I think it's assumed that such knowledge would be so uprooting to people
Mm.
and because it would be so difficult to predict what would occur
Mhm.
that you just don't take the chance. Like you need to start polling on like if the like but you start asking people in a poll, the US government told you that UAPs were real. How would you react? Would you freak out? Like that poll would leak. And that wouldn't be a good look either.
I guess it'd be.
You-
Go ahead.
To add to that, because they actually, I think like 5 months ago, the government said that aliens exist, and
Who? The Mexicans? Because that was a myth, right? The Mexicans had that skeleton in there.
oh no,
Congress.
it
I was
was
like, that's fraud.
this was after the Congress hearings.
um yeah, but was it military? Or was it a Congress person speaking
It was a Congress.
outside of official
Channels.
channels?
Oh.
Well, I heard it from a pretty good source, and she was saying, this week we're told aliens exist, and everyone's like, cool.
I
So
I
kinda had
vaguely
like,
remember this.
yeah, I
I'd
think
have
it
to
was
look
funny.
up.
Yeah,
Oh, I've heard
I'll have to
nothing.
look.
Yeah.
I'll have to
Yeah.
look.
What's the story? Yeah,
I'll
we
have to
need.
Jamie this real
Yeah,
quick.
Jamie, it real quick for us, would you?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's hard to predict the reaction of people. Hmm.
Yeah.
I guess it's. I can only speak for myself. I guess if the U.S. president went on air and said, "Yes, we have reasonable evidence that we've been visited by intelligences from outside our atmosphere. We've talked with we've talked with every other spacefaring civil nation. None of them are claiming it's theirs. We're keeping an eye on it."
Right. Don't worry. We got tabs. What does that mean?
I mean, I don't know. Would that make me like not file my taxes that April? I think I still would, but I can only speak for myself. I guess it would be pretty easy for someone to come in and try to exploit that and say, elect me and I will explain all.
Yeah, and I think you could also see, more like prepper communities. I think going into prepper mode.
Yep.
I think you could see that. I think you could see, you know, I think even if it led to 2 weeks of like somewhat mobby protesty things, like even that, people are like, I'm not just, I can't, I'm not just going to go out there and disclose for the sake of disclosing,
Hmm.
and like, what is the public going to do? Like,
Okay.
we got our best people on it. Like, um, yeah.
So the government did not confirm or deny, but people in the hearing under oath said they exist.
Um, it was closed hearings.
Open.
So who in the hearings said they exist?
Grush and
Are they current or retired?
retired Graves.
Okay.
I was getting nervous about that.
So people who have collected a paycheck from the US government came out and said aliens are real. And I guess I'll just stake my flag in the sand. How can they not be? It's a big universe.
I think that's what people are wondering. It's,
I guess for me, I don't really see what it changes. I guess, yes, if there's an alien invasion, that's going to change a few things. But if they're just here observing us and there are other intelligent creatures, like what paradigm of mine is going to be broken by
I'll
this?
tell you right now. The paradigm as an American that we're the boss.
Hmm.
It's fine if there's aliens out there. It's fine if there aliens are out there and we discover them and it's on our terms and we discover them like we did North America.
Right. We
And
want to
we're
be
coming with guns against bows and arrows. But when we're in the position of Mr. Bow and Arrow,
Hmm.
and these UAPs are flitting around like, hummingbirds, and we're like, how the hell are they doing that?
Hmm.
That, I think, especially as an American, is extremely
Ah,
disconcerting.
okay.
So it's like, I think aliens existing, people would be like, I'm okay with that, but are we still the boss? If the answer is we're better than them, we don't care. If the answer is they're better than us, now I don't believe in aliens.
We want to find bacteria on Mars.
Right.
We don't want urgent
Bacteria to find us.
right, right. We don't want Urkuk the destroyer
Right.
to fly into our atmosphere.
Yeah. Um. Yeah. So
Shout out to Urkuk.
yeah,
If he wants to be on the podcast.
yeah. Open invite to Urkuk.
Yeah. Yeah.
Bring the translator.
Yeah, exactly.
you're just like outside there, like, bro, thank you, my friend.
Right, right,
Yeah.
Yeah.
The soundboard's doing interesting things right now. It's kind of thing. It's talking back.
Yeah, that is interesting.
But I think you're
I
right.
guess we've grown up in a culture, namely Catholicism, that says human beings have never been ultimately in charge. We have some agency, but the idea that there are higher powers out there is so comfortable to the Catholic imagination.
Right.
So it's not very
And how
threatening.
comfortable is the world with Catholics?
Yeah, that's a good
So,
point. Yeah.
we're Catholics are comfortable with aliens. Take that as your barometer of the world being comfortable with aliens.
Yeah. Right.
Don't worry, Catholics have tabs on it. Not a
Yeah.
Thought about it. Cool.
Right. The Catholics are praying to him.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, but I think you're right. Like, if your theology includes angels, boom, you've already got aliens.
You already have extraterrestrials.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. That's Peter Kreeft's point.
Yeah.
Wait. What about like humanoid, well, physical, rational beings as aliens? Because that's my question. That's why I've been so interested about aliens. Is like, how does salvation history play into this now?
Mm, yeah.
Because we have more evidence supporting Christ exists as God than anything else, and everyone that opposes that idea always fails in history. Every heretic, every nation that like tries to eliminate the faith, it never goes well.
Yeah.
So, out of everything we have, Christ being God is probably the most real thing we have. So, did these other alien nations, did they have the choice like Adam did?
Mm,
Did they pass the test and are they just all super chill?
Right.
yeah.
Or-
Yeah, they are unfallen.
Yeah, that's the question. If they did fall, then what would happen?
Well, C.S. Lewis has Paralandra on this, right? And I do think, like, for the specialness of humans, I think it's like we would probably lose the sense that we're as special as we are. But I don't think it would create any, like, angels have their own salvation story. So to your point, like, I do think we would just learn what is the salvation story of other rational creatures.
Like Jesus made a couple pit stops along the way. All right, everybody.
Or it was more like the angels were like, maybe there were physical sentient beings who pass the test, and they're just like, "Look, I'm not going to the Earth's hellhole."
Right.
Yeah, we're gonna bypass that.
Why would I go there?
Yeah. I do love how C.S. Lewis treats this in his space trilogy. Yeah, that he tries to wed the modern understanding of the galaxies with the medieval understanding of the spheres of the planets, spheres of influence, and that Earth is the fallen, it is the dark planet, it's the fallen planet, and these other planets are still in the light, and they have essentially their guardian spirits, and Earth is the one whose guardian spirit betrayed betrayed the divine will, or betrayed the divine will and then was allowed to have Earth as a kingdom. Uh, and it is, I think, a very intelligent and arresting view of how the medieval insights into the way the universe is can be joined with the modern sensibilities of the organization of the solar system and the galaxy. But yes, it doesn't seem to create these immense tensions that weren't there before in
Yeah.
around salvation history. I
Yeah,
guess.
and
Yeah, go
I
ahead.
think if I was a kid growing up, I think my presumption was aliens can't exist because
Hmm.
they're not in the story,
They're not in the story.
and
Interesting.
that may have just been an assumption I made, but I remember being very antagonistic to the idea of aliens like a decade ago, and I was like, no, they're no way. And then thinking about it or talking to people, I was like, oh well, yeah, I guess it wouldn't like disprove anything we believe. Like if anything, would just like enrich and unfold more you know the full ecosystem that's out there.
Yeah, you'd want to ask. You probably that's one of the things that'd be cool is like if you got to talk to them, like what is their life like, and like how do they understand the world and reality and all those things.
Hmm.
It'd be very interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah, it'd be interesting
Urguk was on the podcast.
if Urkuk, shout out to Urkuk. It'd be interesting if they were permitted to observe but not to speak. Right.
Yeah,
They're here, they're watching. Uh yeah, it's interesting. I disagree with Joe Rogan about his conception of AI, right? That it'll just continue to exponentially improve and we'll be able to discover how to improve itself. I just don't know if there's evidence for that. But I do, but I, but I do like his idea that maybe when we started popping off nukes, powers from beyond the heavens started coming in and keeping tabs on us a little more closely. Like, oh, the kids discovered firecrackers. We better make sure they don't blow their fingers off.
I mean that would be crazy if we launched some stuff and it goes up and it just never came down, and we're just like, what? Intercontinental ballistic missile goes up.
Hmm.
You can't intercept those babies, yada yada. Like,
And they're just gone.
and they just like never land. Like, do they land in the North Pole? Like, what's happening? That would be crazy.
That'd be sort of reassuring.
Fire more. Yeah.
We'll launch another one.
They can't catch all of
Right.
them. Make
Sir,
them juggle.
sir, we believe we are witnessing a miracle. I didn't ask for a miracle. Damn it.
Yeah.
I asked
They
you to
could've
blow.
bought more times.
Right. I asked you to blow up St. Petersburg.
Yeah.
Well, depending on who you listen to, that is what they've said has happened.
That
You
miracles
listening
have
to?
yeah, that miracles have intervened to prevent nuclear war. If there was ever a time we needed a miracle, that would be it.
I mean, as ham-fisted as catching an ICBM out of the air? Or,
No,
okay.
no, just like turning them off the silos.
Oh,
So
interesting.
like they would have these weird airs, like it just silos would turn off.
Whose side?
Ours.
Damn.
Yeah. Yeah. Intern Jimmy forgot to wire the box correctly again.
He's an alien. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Jimmy has a startup in Silicon Valley. He's worth 4 billion, you know?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's the stories of like J-Rod. Have you heard of J-Rod? He's
No.
the alien they found, and they had him work in Area 51 for like 20 years. This guy, like, I know, it's a crazy story. This guy, I think it's on the History Channel. He's talking about how he worked with this alien for a long time.
I think I did see this.
Yeah, and so I you could take it or leave it. And it's just like, well, it makes you wonder if people just come up with a story like that, or if it actually happened, and that because a lot of these people that say these things aren't excited about it. They're just like, yeah, it was my job. That's cool.
Hmm.
So when you're not excited about it, it makes you wonder, like, well, you're not trying to get anything from this.
Huh.
You're just telling a fact.
Yeah. I would need to like fully know those people
Yeah.
over the course of their life to like know how they ingest information
Mm-hmm.
and know like how they assess things and how precisely they speak, because I think it's easy to be like that congressperson coming out of that hearing, if what they heard was there's unexplained UAPs, that person might make the statement aliens are real. I probably would not make that statement.
Right.
So unless you really know how the person like assesses facts and like makes claims,
Hmm.
what they like, they'll say the words aliens exist, and then everyone is like, okay, what that means is you have positive evidence that there's like sentient animal beings, alien beings. Um, but the same information that that person received, if I received it, I would not be making those claims.
Right.
Right.
enough
They
instances
have
of
they
that.
have an accepted premise that they're not even saying, which is if there are unexplained phenomenon of a certain kind, I am taking that as evidence of the existence of aliens,
Right.
Rather than
rather
maybe
than
it's a secret operation.
There's an unexplained phenomenon. That's
Yeah.
a lot less interesting, you know.
it's a lot less interesting to go before Congress and be like, there's stuff I don't know about.
Yeah.
Right. I'm not read into secret.
I don't know how we got on the roof.
I don't know. How did he get on the roof? What a zoo. What a zoo that was.
Yeah.
Man, we are at least privileged enough to be able to say we have not had boring politics. We have had the most interesting political year since
Goodness.
1963.
Um, that's another topic I wouldn't mind getting on. One thing I think might be part of people's common curriculum, but it wasn't part of mine, is deep understanding of American history. And I read a book on Lincoln, The Fighting Cap. Oh, what's that book? It's about his cabinet and how he
Oh,
put together
Team of Rivals?
Team of Rivals.
Great book.
Read Team of Rivals, great book. Reading Grant, read the Hamilton biography by Ron Chernow.
Mm.
Those books have been great, but one takeaway is that like American politics has always been crazy. Like if you're the Hamilton story, they're dropping innuendos in the press all the time about Hamilton's affair. Hamilton's dropping innuendos about Jefferson's affair with his slaves. Like they go hard in the paint, and they are not afraid to like to to play dirty. Um, you know, gerrymandering comes from that era
Hmm.
of Pennsylvania politician who's gerrymander. It's a historical artifact, that term,
Hmm.
where some guy whose name was like, who might have been just been called gerrymander, created the boundaries and it looked like a salamander, and then it kind of took off from there. Um, And I just think I always think people's perspective on their current moment, maybe understandably, is always somewhat myopic.
Hmm.
And unless you have a really deep understanding of history, everyone's always saying, like, this is doom and gloom, or this is the craziest thing ever. But, like, if you were 60s and like Watergate, that's crazy,
Hmm.
you know?
The president is
Or,
resigning.
yeah. Or, like, you know, the president got shot. Or, I mean, if you got to think of like
That was Reagan.
scandals of
Monica Lewinsky, 96, 98. Might have been 90. Yeah, it was 98.
that. Um, but like if you like the politics of like in Hamilton's time, just from basically the dawn of time.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking from my American perspective,
From the dawn of time.
from the dawn of
1776, baby.
the time we were the boss. Okay, I want to speak to your boss. um, it's always been a circus.
Mm-hmm.
Like it really has been.
You think people look at their circus and say, never has it been so circusy as today.
Right.
Oh, I agree with you generally. I think 2024 has a very legitimate claim as being the most interesting and chaotic political year since 1963. I'm not saying
Because
ever.
of the assassination attempts.
And also on the Democrat side, not holding a true primary.
I don't know enough about the political machine to comment.
Hmm.
But my thought there is always, I mean, that's political machinery. People talked about the lack of a proper primary as like a threat to democracy.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, take it up with your club. It's like, oh, our club changed its membership standard. Take it up with your club. It's not a threat to democracy. People thought like the way the Democrats ran their primary or decided not to have like a emergency primary
Mm-hmm.
had implications for the American system of government.
Yep.
And I don't see the connection.
It's the equivalent to saying, wow, this coach picked a really weird method to have his starting lineup. That's a threat to the way basketball is played.
Yeah.
Like, no, we're going to play basketball according to the rules with the people the coach put on the field.
Right.
Well, I think the reason why people saw it as a threat is because now whoever's in charge of the party determines who's going to be nominee rather than who gets to run freely in the party and the people decide who the nominee is going to be.
Yeah, and then that would cause people to become dissatisfied with their party and to vote separately. And there was a movement of this, the the free choicers or something. There was a movement in the Democrat Party to not vote for Biden in the primary, to vote like uncommitted. And this gained a bit of a groundswell, where it was people basically voicing their discontent with like, look, we don't want Biden, and we want to like voice that somehow. So I think if people from the get go, if the Democratic Party said like, you know what, primaries, forget about them, then you would see a fracturing of the Democratic Party into something else.
Right.
But I don't see it. I don't see it clearly connecting to some fracturing of the American democracy. So when people talk about that, I'm like, I don't see it. I don't. That doesn't scare me.
I think it was another thing was people wondering, well, who's making the call to put whoever into play? You know, it's like, well, it's obviously not Kamala who's in power here. She's a puppet for whoever put her in place. So it's like, well, who did that? And why are they in charge? And why do they have so much backing? Why can they call these shots? And so I think that's what got. Well, yeah, exactly. whoever
Well,
it is.
so I think there's some fundraising rules. You need to Jamie me on this. But fundraising to a ticket has to go towards the members of that ticket. So my understanding is there was millions and millions of dollars locked into the Biden Harris ticket, potentially as much as like $100 million. So yeah, I'm not really helping with an explanation, but it was kind of like, hey, this candidate, like all the money's already behind her, and technically she was already on the ticket. So it was like, hey, we have half the ticket left, so we're gonna keep the ticket. One person just bowed out, but we're keeping the same ticket that did get through the primaries, and all the money's like locked into that ticket.
Mm.
So we kind of have to keep it that way. Yeah. So
Interesting. Uh, I don't want to belabor this because perhaps I've already mentioned it before. It seems to me really clear that systems of incentives would have suggested to Kamala Harris if she got a phone call and said, all right, we're going to make a run at Biden to get him out. We need you to invoke the 25th. If he just says he won't back down, okay. Kamala says, I will invoke the 25th, but only if you let me run. And the people wanting Biden out say, well, Kamala has a shot. Biden almost certainly will not win. But she's in this sort of perfect position to advance her own interests,
how would the vice president invoke the 25th?
to say that the president is unfit to serve.
Who? I mean, who can make that call?
My understanding is that it is the vice president who can make that call. I think they have to get support from the cabinet, if I understand it correctly. But they're the ones who get
the play.
if they are the ones who get the ball rolling. Well, actually, so that's I'm wondering if you know anything about this. So,
Oh, I'm ready.
technically speaking,
I know where this is going. I'm going to bet $10 I know where this is going.
then tell me.
Well, how we have to write it down. Okay. Okay. Continue. I'll just say this. Is it about terms of election and re-election and how many terms you can be elected for?
Not precisely.
Okay. Then
Okay.
maybe not.
The ticket technically is Donald Trump and JD Vance, correct?
Uh-huh.
They are the president and vice presidents elect.
Mm-hmm.
If both of them were unfit to serve in January
Uh-huh.
because they're dead, or what happens? Do you know? I've been wondering about this because, yeah,
I don't know.
he has his he has his cabinet selections, but they've not been enfranchised by Congress, or excuse me, the Senate, more properly speaking.
Yeah.
And who else is the ticket? It's just the two of them.
Yeah.
So if you killed both of them before they took office, like you can't say, oh, well, Tulsi Gabbard should be the vice president and Vivek Ramaswamy should be the president. You can't really say that. They were not elected. So I'm really curious what happens if
I mean, I wonder if the answer is January 20th, everything happens except, you know, Trump and Vance, right?
Mhm.
And then it just follows the line of succession with whoever is instantiated at that point. So, right, doesn't go to like
Speaker of the House.
So, like, is it just like, okay, the presumption is on January 20th, new Speaker of the House, or I don't even know exactly how the new Speaker of the House is chosen.
Mm-hmm.
So what I was going to say was, everyone's very concerned that Trump has made comments like, you know, you know, if you don't vote for me, this is your last election. Democrats think like if you vote for Trump, that's the last election you'll vote in. There's a lot of talk of like, you know, you just voted in the fascists and there'll be no more free elections.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people are like, well, the we thought of this. Like you can only be elected president twice.
Hmm.
Um, and I was just doing the thought experiment of what if Trump and Vance looked at each other and said, "All right, JD, you run, you get elected, and then the deal is you're going to resign. I'm going to be your VP. You're going to resign, and I'm going to step in.
Hmm.
And I'm going to run on this platform. It's going to be out there in the open that this is what we're going to do.
Hmm.
And, the American public who loves, Trump and Vance are like, yeah, I want Trump again.
Hmm.
I don't care that this is kind of some underhanded
Workaround.
constitutional gerrymandering. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was talking about this with a buddy of mine. I was like, I mean, technically, that could be how it goes, right?
A
And
strategy.
and he was like, yeah, but like imagine if JD becomes president, like it would be so easy to renege on that. And it would be so difficult to like he's like it'd be very hard to strike that deal and run on it. Like it would be pretty difficult, but I was like, but technically that could be the play.
The back door to a third term.
Right. Because like for
Who
me,
wants to ever give up the presidential football?
when people are worried about Trump and it's like, oh, but term limits. Um, the idea that like there is kind of a backdoor in,
Hmm.
you know, I was reading the constitutional, statute on this, if you will. And I was like, oh gosh, why didn't it just say like you can't be acting as president for more than 8 years?
Mm.
Is that so difficult?
Is that so
on,
hard?
come on, Madison. um, yeah. Another topic I wanted to get on was safetyism. This is one of my pet peeves in the modern
Oh,
world.
this is what's grinding your gears.
This is chapping my ass in a major way. Shout out to Burt's Bees. If you need a sponsorship, Burt's Bees. um, I think safetyism connects to some of the political questions, namely COVID, um, namely talk of what the general public accepts as like scientific wisdom. We were talking about like um, science memes, red meat bad, eggs bad, like breathing with your mouth closed good, you know. So um some of the impetus I think behind some of those memes are the general public's like infatuation with safetyism, where it's a higher value than things like your personal freedom. So my fun example on this is candles. Shout out to Tim if he's listening. Um, you've probably heard that candles are now a death trap.
Oh, they're the new boogeyman.
They're the new boogeyman.
I had not heard this.
So candles are bad because they're releasing carcinogens into the air. They're going to give you cancer, yada yada yada.
Oh, really?
Yes. So blow out your candles. So a couple of distinctions. One, are you getting like the chemical, crap candles from TJ Maxx, and you're like, how did they make this smell like a pumpkin pie? Probably not distilling grandma's pumpkin pie into a candle. So there's, yeah, plenty of synthetic material. So they light the candle. That's like drifting into the air. You're like, wow, it smells like grandma's pumpkin pie. You're killing yourself.
There's a thing.
Yeah, you will never live as long as grandma because of your nostalgic candle. So candles that are like all natural, beeswax, yada yada, like odorless, scentless, whatever, those are like less bad, but they're still bad.
Okay.
And the reason this chaps my ass is because there's just no part of the conversation where someone can say, I value being nostalgic for grandma's pumpkin pie more than the minuscule risk of cancer involved by inhaling the airborne carcinogens from the candle.
No one can make that value call and be considered sane.
Right. And that value call and another nuance on that is no one can question, like, sure, burning candles is bad, but burning one candle every so often in the bathroom at a party, so the bathroom doesn't stink to high heaven, right? Like, people are like, no, candles are bad. Like, just no candles anymore. It's like, well, like, parts per million of carcinogens in the air, if it's so low,
Mm-hmm.
then the occasional candle burning is probably fine. But even if it weren't, I still want to be able to make the value judgment that I don't care and I prefer
To
to
smell pumpkin pie
exactly.
because it reminds me of grandma.
Yes.
And I'm willing to roll that very multi-sided
Yes.
die. Yeah.
Hmm.
I'm willing to roll that 800-sided die
Yeah.
in order to definitely think about grandma
Yeah.
and her pumpkin pie. And so safetyism in your mind is the ongoing and hydra-headed campaign to find potential threats
Right.
and treat them as definite tsunamis coming to the beach.
Right. And I mean, I'd be happy to be told there's more nuance on this, but to me, it sounds like the implicit assumption is just that anything you can do to help improve your lifespan is worth doing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, why would you ever choose to smoke a cigar or light a candle or have a glass of whiskey? Those things are not helpful for your health. So get rid of them. And it's just like, it's like the meme red meat is now bad or eggs are now bad. And it's just, it seems to be somewhat ingrained in people to accept the fact that if I could do without something like the Woodford or the cigar, that I just should, because why would I ever voluntarily like drink a bottle of whiskey and take a week off the end of my life? You know?
Is
And
it
I have very strong reactions that I dislike that attitude. I think people should evaluate that in themselves, and I dislike when that is like that value structure is imposed on me.
ah? So it annoys you when people live their lives by that value structure because it seems that they are dehumanizing themselves. So you don't like observing it, but it's even more noxious to you when they want to impose that value structure on you.
Right.
Oh, I would never smoke a cigar. Ah, I would never smoke a cigar. They're such carcinogenic death traps.
Yeah.
All right, fine. Clearly, we're not going to be celebrating my nephew's birth together, but I can live without that.
Right.
You should never smoke a cigar. I'm going to pass legislation to make it impossible for you to ever smoke a cigar.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, you say, I want to throw hands.
Right. Don't even get me started on fluoride. Um, but yeah,
It's
so
too
I mean,
trite, perhaps, to say that if
totally
you
come off
have
with
a
COVID.
materialistic view of the world, then anything that threatens material existence is intolerable.
I think generally yes. So this is why I think like during COVID, like the folks in the public who were more religious had a different sense of how to handle things, because it was like church is just as important to me as the risk of me dying of COVID. That's I am making that value judgment call. And as a sweetener, it turns out it wasn't as, you know, dangerous as we all thought, right? But even if it were, the religious person is going to say, I value the like community of the church, or, you know, going and hanging out with friends in interpersonal connection and community more than just being like, I don't want to die, you know? Um, and the fact that that could be like a valid stance just was never really like observed or talked about. So I think I get annoyed when these science memes are presented as like, hey, red meat's bad. So of course everyone's giving up red meat, right? Because like the new research is out there. And like one, even if the research was valid, great. I have more information to weigh my choices, but I might still come out on the side of red meat. And it also turns out that a lot of those like memes that get into the general awareness aren't always backed up by like the rigor that you think they are. So often it turns out like this claim wasn't even true to begin with, which just like I think people focus on that more.
Yeah.
But I'm more concerned with like, look, even if everything you say is true, I still don't really care. I'm still lighting grandma's candle, even if I know I'm increasing my risk of cancer.
That's very interesting. I think we've touched on this in other conversations that often debate about things, people who are trying to defend the perimeter of freedom end up being drawn into debates that they really shouldn't be drawn into. For example, they want to defend eating red meat, or they want to defend the liberal arts as a valid collegiate course of study, or
Mhm.
any number of things. And they end up trying to argue with the opponents on the opponent's chosen battleground,
Right.
right? So they say, oh, well, actually, that data is bad. That study was underfunded, blah, 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 right? And they try to win the argument. And I think there's some value in that and there's some legitimacy to that. But ultimately, it seems to me that often the people who are trying to defend the perimeter of freedom, their basic philosophical stance is there are other goods besides utility, and people should be allowed to choose those other goods without being condemned.
Right.
And there's remarkably little talk about that. Like, why would I
Yeah.
choose to go to a college that doesn't give me a major? Well, honestly, I'm okay with a longer route to my chosen career, or perhaps even the greater risk of a little poverty in my life if I'm able to contemplate these ideas.
Yeah.
But no one seems to want to say that. And I think I've mentioned this to you that I often found myself in these noxious conversations trying to say to people, oh, if you get a liberal arts degree, your career options are going to be as easy as someone who went and studied in a hot STEM field,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
maybe the answer to that, we should have just admitted no,
Right.
right? There's
Right.
a right, like what was it, 8 years ago? It was like everyone needs to code, right? Coding camps, go
Mhm.
get coding, right?
Yeah.
Coding was hot.
AI took that.
Hey, I took that, right? Yeah, it's shutting down the coding camps. Before that, it was energy, right? Because everyone was fracking.
Hmm.
That wasn't so much a college thing as a career choice thing, but I think it's the same type of phenomenon. Like, hey, this is hot. You can go make a lot of money doing this right away.
Yeah.
And it seems like the liberal arts advocates were always being drawn into this catch-up game. And I felt like maybe would they have gotten more respect if they had just said, yeah, look, you know what? We don't care as much about worldly success as other parts of the academic environment because we think there are other things that are more important. I don't know. Maybe mom and dad wouldn't have been able to hear that for their 18-year-old. What's my son going to do for a job? I don't know. But he's going to have a great philosophical background. Like, would that have,
Yeah.
yeah, would that have lost people at parent orientation? Maybe it would have.
He'll really be able to think about Urguk and the aliens.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that helpful?
Right, right.
um, yeah, I think Thomas Hibbs, who was president of UD for a spell,
Mm-hmm.
talks about how you hollow out the humanities when you defend them on the grounds of the like utilitarian sciences.
Mm-hmm.
So if you try to play it on that field, then it's like, well, literature is great because it teaches you how to read and write. And then you start to be like, well, why do we need that course in Shakespeare? Because that's not really how we talk or read and write now. So like you engage on that playing field and then you start to hollow out the thing you're trying to defend.
Right.
And
right.
he was getting at that point. So he's got great essays on this, but he was getting at that point where you just have to like toe the line. But I think the pressures in higher ed to be fiscally responsible to have enough students attend is just becomes overwhelming and it swamps the debate. Like unless you're an Ivy and you can say, hey, we're just great to come to, I think you engage on the battleground of the enemy because you're kind of forced to. And you think maybe there's enough ammo there to win.
You might
You
think
don't
there's
see the
enough ammo
long-term
there to win.
consequences.
Right. Like creationists who tried to disprove evolutionists. They ultimately accepted the same premise.
Creationists who attempted to disprove.
Right. If evolution is true, God can't exist. They actually acceded to that. So they spent all this energy trying to disprove evolution.
Yeah.
And they were always running around to the next available perceived weak spot.
Right.
Remember the God of the gaps arguments? I think these were popular in the, I want to say 90s, but I'm happy to be corrected on this.
Jamie.
Right? Yeah, Jamie it. Right. God of the gaps said, well, we kind of understand the pollination process and we understand in a flower and we understand the photosynthesis process in the plant overall, but we don't understand the pheromone signaling that certain successful plants use to be able to attract insects. We just don't understand how they do it. And then 20 years and 18 scientific studies later, we kind of get it. People are like, God's been pushed out of this gap.
Right.
Evolution can explain it.
Yeah. Well, I think that's another example of it's either like creation, everything fully formed from the start. It's like everything Noah's Ark style, or it's God cannot possibly exist and we all came from amoeba. And it's like, oh, interesting. Like, what's the Catholic Church take? Like, God needed to create the start, and then evolution can come in and help, like, move the ball down the field. But God created the game still. And once again, it's that like you're taking the best of both sides and going down the middle.
Sure.
And
that's uncomfortable.
It's extremely uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And
Jordan Peterson does always talk about this in the image of the yin and the yang, right?
Right.
But that middle line does curve, right? Sometimes you're kind of on this side, then you kind of bend back the other way. You're a traitor to everyone. Yeah.
And the curve, like, if a line has no real content, like the line has no color. You're not like, I'm part of the black crowd, I'm part of the white crowd,
Yeah.
You're just in the like unidentified middle,
There ain't no tribe in the middle.
You're an intellectual orphan. And and you're looking for your parents and you can't find them. And maybe they're UAPs and Urku is your stepdad. I don't know.
Right. And you don't get invited. You don't get invited.
Your uncle.
And Elon is your uncle.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I hope he is an alien because, geez, running 8 companies.
11 kids.
And 11 kids. Yeah, definitely an alien.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let me turn the table. You guys have been podcasting for a while. What are some of the most interesting things you've heard that have either generated, consistent thinking post the conversation or have changed your thinking on a topic?
Well, kind of this one I've been thinking about a lot lately. Dr. Virginia was on and we are talking about the difference between conservative and leftists. And we were trying to figure out like what's the main difference. And I posited that conservatives want more self-responsibility for their actions, and leftists want other people to take care of their problems for them. It's kind of like that inner dynamic of like, oh, do it yourself or have someone else do it for you.
Okay.
That's that was something I thought from what I've seen recently. And she was saying that when you force someone to be good, you remember this? How she was talking about the destruction of gratitude.
Right, right.
Remember
Yeah.
how she phrased it?
Mandatory mandatory charity causes the destruction of gratitude.
Yeah, that's it.
Interesting.
So she was saying that when you force someone to be good, you can no longer let the other side be grateful
Yeah.
because it wasn't an act of charity, it was a forced thing.
Yeah.
Right. Here's your handout. We garnished some wealthy people's wages to give this to you. But they had to. Yep. I'm not really thankful to them.
Right.
Yeah.
Let me just throw something into the mix. Then I'm curious.
That was just something that's been on my mind.
Mm.
Did you guys talk at all about my take on left versus right? Is the left trusts systems and needs a system as a solution,
Mm.
where the right trusts kind of the invisible hand, the marketplace a little bit, but trusts like organic outcomes.
Ah.
So, so like if I'm talking to a friend who's more on the liberal side of the spectrum, if there are poor people or if there are homeless people, we need an agency who's like, the problem is articulated, homeless people on the streets. The agency is instantiated. Find homeless people and house them. Okay, cool. Now we can point fingers at whether that agency is doing its, mission effectively, yada yada.
Mm.
Where it seems like the perspective of someone on the right is more okay with the fact that, like, hey, we can trust our culture of, you know, almsgiving religious, you know, populace to fund our churches and our, Catholic charities and our other charitable organizations and Red Cross and whatnot.
Mm.
And they will see the need and they will go address it. So every time I've had a debate with someone who's more on the liberal side of the spectrum, is like, if there's a problem out there and there's no system to address it, that is a failure. And unless there's a system, the problem remains unaddressed. Um, that to me seems like the biggest divide. So you had said, like, the right wants to do things for themselves, the left wants someone to do it for them. And I would nuance that to say, like, the left thinks there should be a system in place to help address it. Not necessarily that it like should be done for someone, but there should be some system in place to do it. So like there needs to be a system to disperse food stamps. And they would be okay with like some requirements to earn your food stamps, maybe. But there needs to be an articulated system or solution in place.
It's really interesting.
I find that to be the biggest divide, where I'm okay with organic solution and my liberal
Based on
friends are not.
your liberal friends say, no, there's always going to be incentives that override the common good. And that's how we get child labor, company owned towns, any number of abuses of human welfare. That's how we get slavery.
Um, Not that the I don't think that there will always be like corruptions, but just that if there's not a positive structure in place, there needs to be structures to address problems.
If there ain't a DMV, no one's going to drive.
Well, that, but like if um there's not a Department of Education,
Hmm.
we have no entity to point the finger at when outcomes are poor.
Okay.
And the conservative would say, let's work on like the parochial, the Catholic schools, or let's help the homeschooling families. And the liberal will say, let's put together an agency, uh, an agency on education, and now we've put in place a structure to, in parallel with the problem, and that seems to be the fundamental approach of liberals. So when people say
Liberals say,
someone
"Oh,
else
there's
to
a
fix their
problem."
problem, I don't. I think they think, and this will probably sound bad, but I think they think if there's a big enough problem, only like a structure can fix it.
That's really interesting. That's I'm gonna think about that
Suckle
more.
at the teat. The teat of my wisdom.
But it's a reflexive response, you're saying.
Tom goes, we've stopped recording. Urgook is now on.
Urgook is going to spirit Kevin away. Yeah. Out to the 11th dimension.
Yeah.
Different plane of thought. But you're saying it's reflexive.
Yes.
I see a problem. Let's set up an agency.
Mhm.
An agency. It will have agency to do the thing that needs to be done
Yes.
to make this problem go away.
Yes.
Whereas a conservative mindset is let's think about the incentives that created the current problem and what incentives could reverse it.
Yes, and I will take it to the granular level of how people approach business. So like when there's some failure in the day-to-day operations of like my daily life,
Mm-hmm.
some people are like, there was an issue. Okay, let's build a process. Let's put in a process. Other people's default is, let's get better people that we can just trust.
Mm-hmm.
Those one person's default is, hey, let's get a better culture, which is like better people, better fundamental principles of operating.
Yeah.
Other people are like, unless there's a process and a checklist, I can't really trust. I can't trust people.
Yeah.
And I think that the derivative effects are the typical things that we associate with, like, the mommy state as like, okay, the rules are the mommy state, but it's like, if you don't trust people fundamentally,
mm-hmm.
and you can only trust process or structure,
mm-hmm.
you see the connection between those ideas.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
But you'll see it on this.
I said that when we had someone on. I think there is something deeply mothering about one model of ruling people, and there's something deeply masculine about another way of ruling people, which is at the foundational understanding is people need to be taken care of, or people need to take care of their own problems.
Yeah, and I mean, it's probably uncomfortable to admit, but you probably need a mix of both. Like,
right,
if marriage is the key to family, then the key to society is probably the mothering liberal,
yeah,
and the fathering conservative,
mm-hmm.
who's like, but both sides need to avoid, Jordan Peterson talks about the overbearing mother,
Mm-hmm.
who won't release their child into the, great adventure of life,
knowing that it will end in their death.
right? And then the father, what's his issue?
Absenteeism, right?
Absent. Oh.
Men are always tempted or too close to uninvolvement.
That is interesting.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's my hot take on Tom's answer. John, what's your biggest takeaway from suckling at the teat of previous podcasters?
I'm not sure now that I want to name any specific guests, lest they think I had the image you describe.
Tom goes, this is becoming more and more editorializing work.
We had Dom on a couple of weeks ago, and I found it really interesting for him to openly say, essentially, I want to be religious. I feel like there is a power out there. I can't get on board with God
Okay.
because God seems too specific in his mandates if we are to take as God the Judeo-Christian God. Specifically,
Old
he's
Testament?
specifically he mentioned homosexuality.
Interesting.
Like, why would God say, "Don't do this thing, you two," even though you're attracted to each other, and you've been attracted to each other for as long as you remember? Two men, two women.
Hmm.
So I found that really interesting to speak with someone in depth about essentially wanting to be on one side of the religious fence, and there was one thing that just irked them intellectually so strongly that they said, I can't go. And I found that really interesting.
What was the, you know, was what was the rejoinder? Not necessarily antagonistic, but what was the response from you two on?
Well, I went from the natural way of like sex is made for one action, that's the procreation of children. And that act can also be pleasurable at the same time. So if you put the pleasure above the primary act, then you have an inversion. I didn't say it in these clear terms,
Hmm.
but that was my goal was to get to that point.
Okay.
And
So kind of a
he,
natural philosophy
yeah,
approach.
and to him, he was going from his really good friend who was like, um, you know how you like girls? I like guys that way. I don't know why. And
Yeah.
Dom was like, "Well, I can't not give that to my friend, because to
Right.
him, he thought of like taking away his friend's goodness in life."
Yeah.
If it feels so right.
But I was gonna go to the next spot of like, well, have you heard about how they're turning the frogs gay in the water?
Yeah.
There's underlying
Fluoride.
fluoride. We got the testosterone.
What does RFK say about that?
Yeah, yeah.
So
They're turning the
Was
frogs.
fluoride next frogs?
yeah.
Yeah.
So, but I don't. But that's also true though. Like most gays have a really messed up hormonal balance.
Hmm.
So when people say, "Oh, I'm just gay naturally," it's like, well, they're usually really skinny. They're usually very effeminate. They have no bone structure. They have no muscle. They never really done hard work. So all the things that actually makes you a man hasn't been present. So they automatically go to feminine tendencies, and then they're like, "Well, I need a man in my life." So they adopt the feminine role, and then some other guy who's not that masculine will be like, "Oh, I can be that masculine figure for you."
I do know a lot of muscular gays.
But are they actually masculine though?
I mean,
Do you really like? Would you call him a bro, or would you call him like?
I would say
You give him the real term.
I would say I know I think broad characteristics. I could see some of the things you're talking about. Um I think there's plenty of counterexamples to that like the gay community would point to as like
As in like professional athletes or
professional athletes, or like it would also be interesting to look at like what is cause versus effect.
Hmm.
Um where like if yeah.
Yeah.
So this was Dom's big hang up.
This was and it was interesting for him to have it so for him to speak so freely about wanting to be like
So
a
why couldn't he
believer.
be a believer in God sans Judeo-Christian?
How else do you personify him? right?
Like
What
he's
other
not willing to
religion?
accept that there's a force out there.
No, very much the opposite. He thinks there's a force out there. He
Okay.
can't put a face to it
Okay.
because the religion that has a face for God has all these other rules,
Oh,
right?
interesting.
Hinduism, Buddhism, even even Islam to an extent, although I think that's a little bit more in the middle.
Yeah.
None of these have God the Father.
Right.
And I think I'd be happy to have Dom clarify this, but I think he wants to have God the Father be a reality. The problem in his mind is that as represented by the Judeo-Christian revelation, God the Father has a big no-no list. And the no-no list includes
So this is a lot of fun shit.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Like, oh man, no ice cream during Lent. This
Yeah.
no list sucks.
Right. Why is God the Father shutting the party down at 11? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I think for me, Jordan Peterson has been extremely helpful in this regard
Hmm.
because I think I grew up, extremely strict, Roman Catholic household for all of our listeners who aren't familiar with our background. Um, extremely strict Roman Catholic household, homeschooled, right? So like very kind of narrow set of like acceptable behaviors, I would say, And I growing up was very straight laced. And despite the rumors, I still am. um,
We're gonna have to Jamie that, Yeah.
yeah.
What does that mean?
Exactly. Every now and then you got to dance with Urguk. Take Urguk around the ballroom once or twice. But I think growing up, it was so easy to become focused on the rules, and it was like you are good if you follow these rules, and the rules took on a life of their own, where it was good just to follow the rule. And the rule was never talked about growing up as a distillation of like human wisdom. And that's where Jordan Peterson comes in. And I find Jordan Peterson so helpful. His 10 rules for life are like, hey, if you want to like feel fully free as a person and fully like as an agent in the world, don't obfuscate yourself through lying. Growing up, it was always like lying is bad because it's a sin. It was never talked about as like lying is bad because you were designed to like live freely and fully, and lying is like, a shortcut escape route. So the rules, when I say took on a life of their own, it was like it's good to follow the rules just because they're the rules, not because it's like here's the boiled down wisdom of what the best humans have found the best way of living to be. And now that I'm sure. So just to bracket, there's probably the listener who's like, okay, you're making like, the Ten Commandments and religion into like natural philosophy. You're like Marcus Aureliusing the religion. But I think it's easy to lose that sense as like a cradle Catholic where, it's good just to follow the rules, and there are so many, um, as opposed to approaching it with this like richer sense of like how you could be as a person. And that's what I found so helpful about Jordan Peterson, who seems to be going on his own like journey of what does it mean to be like the best type of human I can be. Yeah. And he's getting very close to like the religious answer, I think. But like that 10 rules for life book, I think gave me somewhat more motivational impetus to follow certain rules. Can't really read that. What does that mean?
12.
12 rules for life. Oh, yeah, thanks. Urguk gave me a
Yeah,
brain blast.
Urguk stole a couple. Yeah.
Of course, Jordan, your invitation still stands to come correct the issue in person.
That'd be so much fun. Yeah, we'd love
Yeah,
it.
we love Jordan. Um, but the way he talks about things from like um just from that kind of grounds up perspective,
Hmm.
um, I think is really appealing.
Mm.
And I think when someone like maybe Dom is presented like a god of rules,
Hmm.
you're kind of you're jumping too many steps. And it's one of those things where like you're not ready to talk about the god of rules. Let's talk about like what's the collected wisdom of of mankind. That's where like you read Jordan's 12 rules for life, you're like, those all kind of make sense. I kind of agree with those. And then it's like, oh, well, like those are kind of all true because of like the structure of reality. And then it's like the structure of reality is because of, the divine. And then it's like, well, the divine was like, hey, people don't always want to read a whole book on the 12 rules for life. So here's a shortcut. Follow this list of 10. I'll cut it down from 12 to 10. You know what I mean? Um, and that has just really stuck with me because I think like growing up, the like rules as a life of their own has always been very prominent for me.
Mm.
And reading some Jordan Peterson and just listening to him, I'm like, you really have to reframe this. You have to like instead of starting with the rule, you have to like arrive at the rule where you're like, gosh, all of that accumulated wisdom of like how not to like hide myself from people who disagree with me and to like live boldly and practice all that self-help literature I'm checking out from the business section at the library. um how would I boil that down to its essence and convey it to a friend? Like I guess I would say like just don't lie about something, but like when you achieve that distillation, it feels so much more potent than when you're just given the list a priori. And I think growing up religious, you're just given the list from the get go. And
Because it is efficient.
it is efficient. And if you do just follow the list, you'll probably have, to a certain extent, like better outcomes, right? Like you'll probably be happier in like a monogamous marriage than if, you know, you
You
sleep
run
around for
around,
a decade,
you
you
run
know?
around coveting your neighbor's wife.
And plenty of people have told me they're like, gosh, I just can never find a good guy, and like, you listen to some of those stories, and there's plenty of stories about like, if you followed certain rules that the Catholic Church endorses, like, you would probably weed out some of the bad guys who are just there to like use and abuse and move on. Um,
Such as, so a common trope here is the Catholics frown on sex outside of marriage. But you're saying that might be a great example. Maybe if you avoided granting sexual access to men before marriage, you would rebuff any number of predatorial men because they realize the thing that they really want is not available.
yes,
But it's so much more efficient to say, don't have sex if you're not married to him.
right, and like,
But that sounds so much harsher. Like, oh, I can't have fun. Uh, well, no, that's not really the point. The point is, don't give something away that's precious
right.
to people who will trot on it.
And like you'll find this in the secular world where people are like, never sleep with someone before the third date. Like they move the goalposts, but they have the same commandment. You know what I mean? Like so, and then it's like the commandment is weaker because they probably just haven't thought through it quite as much, but it's still there.
And
You
they're
know what I
still
mean?
ultimately striving after the same thing. Don't give something away. Don't give something good away too easily.
Right.
Do you want to come on tomorrow and with Dominic?
Yeah. Let's hash this out.
Yeah.
Let's get him in as a hat. um
That's
Yeah, the Dominic thing is very interesting, but I think Jordan Peterson is that's my hot take on the Dom thing. Is like if you approach it, it's like as opposed it's like when someone gives you the answer, like if someone gives you the answer without you working towards it, it seems like so obvious and easy. But if you're forced to like get to the answer on your own, it becomes this like precious thing that you hold on to.
Right. Yeah, I remember a professor of mine showing us a painting. It's a very silly painting. It's two peasants walking in the woods, and one trips. One has, in the painting, it's obviously one frame. One has tripped and fallen into a puddle, and the other peasant is laughing at him.
Huh?
I think it's Dutch, right? It looks like this slightly sly, mostly fun depiction of Dutch late medieval life.
Huh?
But then he pointed out this little thing in the background. It's through the trees, it's at the edge of a forest, it's off in the corner, and it's a pyramid. And he says, "Why is that there?" And we're like, "Whoa, wait a minute. Why is there a pyramid in a painting of two young Dutchmen goofing off?"
Yeah.
He said, "You know what you should do? You should walk for half an hour and just think about it." And that's how we ended the class.
Okay.
And I've walked a lot longer than half an hour thinking about this. Why is that in there? Why? Why is it in there? What is the artist trying? What is the artist doing?
Did you ever come to an answer?
I don't have a good one.
So he left you hanging?
He did. He did. He's left us hanging for 15 years.
It's interesting. I
Yeah.
mean, this isn't this maybe is tangential to what you just said, but I think Matt talked about this. Um to appreciate something, you have to try to do it on your own.
Oh,
Before you complain about poetry being boring, try to write a sonnet. Try to write something that like captures a feeling of like the smell of like autumn or like the smell of, you know, the fires you smell in October on the air.
yeah.
Try to put on in writing on paper something that captures that.
Hmm.
Once you've tried to do that, then the shortcut, like the rule is like go read the, you know, the poet who's an expert on that, read their poetry, and you're like, oh wow, it creates that feeling in me or whatnot. And it could be easy to just like look at poetry and be like, oh, that's so obvious. Like once it's right there in front of you, of course it's obvious. But like try to achieve it on your own and you'll appreciate it a lot more.
Yeah.
Like try to write your own list of 10 commandments that the world needs to follow. Then then decide if you're like, gosh, it'd be great if I could just borrow from those
That,
tablets.
yeah.
You know what I mean? Like try to do the work of creating your own set of 10. And then I think it would make people be like, wow, there's so much wisdom in those things that have just been given to us. But if it's given to us, then it's, easy to, you know,
Well, it's easy to
what
gripe
was
about
it?
him.
What breeds contempt? Familiarity breeds contempt.
Familiarity does breed contempt. Yeah.
Um,
Ease breeds contempt.
yeah. But I think that like trying to write poetry is a good example of that, or like try to paint a painting, and then go into the museum, and you're like, oh wow, like
Hmm.
there's a lot here that I could never do, you know?
Or it would, or maybe I could, but it would take me 20 years of diligent practice.
Right.
Maybe I should appreciate what someone left for a heritage to the rest of his human peers,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, we'd spend less time yammering on about Van Gogh's insanity and struggles with any number of psychotic incidents, right? And
Yeah.
think, ugh, Van Gogh, what an amusingly erratic tale and an
Uh-huh.
amusingly erratic life.
Right.
If we had actually spent some time painting and then went and saw his paintings and thought, how did he do that?
Well, so,
especially since there was no one else doing it.
so I don't know if Picasso falls into this, but someone made the comment that Picasso was so good. And I was talking to someone who is an artist, and I brought up Picasso in a derogatory fashion. And she was like, the only reason he was so good at the abstract is because he had mastered the fundamentals. So he was so far removed from the common critique that, like, my 5-year-old could do that. No, like, he got to the point where he did the abstract, but it was based on, like, he only got there through all the tradition that came before.
Hmm.
And maybe you disagree to like where he ended up, but he only got there as the final stop on the train that
Mhm.
is everything else that you think is great. He
Yep.
mastered all of that and went one step further. For him, one step farther,
Yep.
right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah. I remember seeing that in Monet, Edouard Monet, right? He's considered the father of Impressionism, and you see his impressionistic works, and you think, oh, this guy wanted to paint without the discipline of lines. But then you go and see his early work,
uh-huh.
and you realize, oh, wow, he was a good portrait artist.
Right,
He knew what
right.
he was doing. And then he was brave enough to defy the common practice of his age and say, let's do something a little different. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's people who worked through all the preparatory stages
Yeah.
to achieve that like that final thing, which I
Hmm.
think is analogous to like to Dom's situation,
Hmm.
where it's like, yeah, it is kind of weird to think about, but it's like the journey is very essential for like really arriving at the end.
Huh.
Um, I think that's the same for Credo Catholics, where it's like, oh yeah, I was always given these rules, but unless you can like organically feel like you've come to them in a sense, they're just these random mandates from on high.
I
Um,
wonder why.
Jordan Peterson kind of upended that for me, which is why I appreciate him.
I
So
wonder if
his
that's
12 rules for life.
is that what happens, what goes wrong in many debates? Because people want to thrust their conclusions
Hmm.
into the paradigms of their interlocutors, right?
Yeah,
Right? They don't spend enough time setting up how they've arrived. But neither do they spend enough time understanding how the other person arrived.
this is why I think the Socratic method is so potent.
Mm-hmm.
Is it has the patience for someone to get to like where they I hesitate to say where you want them to end up,
Yeah.
but it is like it is the deeply human approach to feeling like you fully arrived.
Yeah.
And I think that's why it has such staying power. Because if you work someone through it, they're like, okay, I'm like fully committed to where I've ended up. But if you're just like, hey, don't tell a lie, agree or disagree, sounds good. There's no staying power there,
Mm-hmm.
you know? Uh,
Yeah.
Reminds me of one of the guys I follow, Alex Ramosi. He's a business guy, but he loves like philosophizing about language terms, all these different things, and
uh-huh.
kind of give you like he'll think of everything in frames of mind. And one of the things he said was that if you can't explain what you believe, it's not your thought. Someone
Mm,
gave that to you.
It's
Until you,
borrowed.
yeah, it's borrowed. Until you can explain it yourself, that is not yours. And I was like, that is really powerful because then you start thinking of all the things you believe, and you're like, I should really have a good explanation. If anyone asks me, what do I believe?
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think with a lot of those implicit assumptions of like conservative liberal, a lot of things that I probably like am inclined to, like the things you're inclined to agree or not agree with, are the things like your inclinations are somewhat unexplainable.
Right.
So the like, you know, my inclinations to be like, oh, that feels better, or that feels better. You know, like those are the things that I should probably distrust the most because they're not fully thought through or
I was already leaning that way.
right.
It was so
Like,
easy to get me here.
Yeah. And the person who says the thing that you're like, oh, that feels so good to believe. That should be your clue. Like you don't actually have good reasons to believe it, you know?
Yeah,
Um,
that's great.
yeah.
Unfortunately, we are out of time. Yeah, great to
Okay, the
have you
tea
here.
is dry.
Yeah, so great to have you on here, Kevin. We really hope that you can return and give us more of your thoughts on a wide variety of topics. We've certainly enjoyed this conversation. So thank you again.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
Hopefully we go viral.
I think we will.